insights on consumer behavior on mobile across 400 million unique devices globally, around 100 million in the United States. And something that's key to know about Ogury is that this is all built consumer first. So we're entirely GDPR and CCPA compliant by design, and that'll come to life a little bit more as we walk through some of these slides. So enough about Ogury, but we wanted to just kind of ground us in the idea that mobile is extremely critical in identifying consumer behavior, as it's the most personal device to us. You'll see here that consumers are spending 5 hours plus on mobile on a daily basis, obviously average, but pretty staggering number. And 81% of consumers state that they have their mobile device within arm's length at all times. Scary, maybe sad, but true. It's truly become an extension of us and definitely the most personal media channel and a window into our actual intent and consumer behavior, more so than any other channel that we've seen to date. That being said, it's not only an opportunity from a personalization standpoint, but it's also an opportunity as it pertains to media spend. So we're seeing that mobile will be reaching around $87 billion in the upcoming year, which is capturing around a third of media spend in totality. So obviously there's an enormous identifier on mobile as an opportunity for marketers. But even more so than that, there's a huge opportunity from a search perspective on mobile. So of that dollar amount, $28.2 billion in 2019 being dedicated specifically to search dollars. So again, enormous opportunity for personalization, enormous opportunity for consumer reach and a slice of the overarching spend pie, but also an opportunity for mobile search, excuse me. And then we need to identify that searchers can't really be created equal. We know that consumers are spending all of this time on mobile, but they're interacting with it in a very different way, whether that's between app and site or mobile versus desktop. And we're seeing that around 79% of keywords have varying degrees of results as it pertains to searching on mobile versus searching on desktop. So what we want to kind of convey here, and again, it will come to life a little bit more as we go through, is that we can't look at this in a silo. We can't look at search as one mechanism because mobile is kind of changing the game and how consumers are looking for and getting attracted to content. So we're seeing that obviously there's a difference in varying results from a desktop to mobile perspective as it pertains to search results, but we're also seeing that mobile is the go-to for a majority of consumers. 75% of smartphone owners turn to mobile first, purely because of the immediacy and the personalization that they have the opportunity to get once they're searching and raising their hand for intent. But also 70% of web traffic is happening on device, on mobile. So again, going along the lines of that opportunity to reach this consumer in a very personalized and custom way, but also there's enormous amount of volume of consumers searching on device comparative to desktop. That being said, when we're talking about this opportunity, it's enormous for brands. If you talk about the personalization, you talk about the volume of consumers there, we're seeing that 51% of smartphone users have discovered a new product or brand on device. And this isn't just from a search perspective, but think about the plethora of outlets that consumers have to identify and be connected to brands on device. And then we're seeing that 92%, even more important as we talk about performance and search, 92% of mobile users who have searched for a product ended up making a related purchase. So that overarching path to purchase is really, really critical in understanding outside of just searches on device. We need to be able to look at the entirety of the mobile landscape and the mobile picture as it pertains to consumers' journey. So, like I had mentioned, we can't really look at search on mobile in silos. We need to be able to understand between how consumers are interacting with search results, not only in app, but on site, and be able to identify the nuances as a means for qualification to drive performance. So we just talked about a lot of opportunities within this space, right? But like any other media channel, it doesn't come without its challenges. And the first one is closing the data gap. So marketers today see less than 5% of a mobile journey of a consumer just based on the fact that we're talking about brands that sit on an enormous amount of first-party data, but it's just through the lens of their own ecosystem. So being able to understand consumers' behaviors outside of how they're interacting with your either owned and operated sites and apps or owned content is really critical. The second, specifically to a search perspective, is the limited supply and the increased cost. I think this year, Google had come out and said that CPCs have only increased around 6%, and this is the first time in 5 years that it hasn't increased in double-digit numbers. So we're seeing a leveling out, but it's still a volatile and very cluttered ad environment, and we need to be able to understand the consumers in order to kind of take them outside of just the search results page as a means to reach them with branded content. And then lastly, providing transparency and putting the control back in the consumer's hand. This goes directly in line with what we were saying about GDPR and domestically CCPA. So there's still over 50% of consumers that don't necessarily trust how their data is being handled. So like I was saying, the ethos of Ogury is really being able to put that control back in the consumer's hand and start with that consent in a very transactional way, letting them know what we're going to be observing and how it would benefit them. So, Ogury's solution to this is what we're calling user engagement, being able to leverage first-party mobile journey data and intent data to identify the most qualified intent signals in order to attract consumers. And that starts with that consent piece. So as I'd mentioned a couple of times now, Ogury is GDPR compliant by design. So what that means is before we observe any kind of data signals, any kind of intent identifiers, we have a relationship with the consumer at a device level, which they need to opt into our technology. You'll see here on the left left-hand side on both, the actual opt-in. So we create a relationship with the consumer at that device level, letting them know what we're going to be observing. And the value proposition to them is that they'll be having a more tailored and relevant ad experience to them as a means to lower frequency, but also be able to have a more engaged and personalized ad experience. So once we have that consent, kind of changes the game on that mobile journey data and intent signals that we're able to see, like I was saying. Right here, before Ogury and before that consent, marketers are kind of subject to only seeing, while it can be a large amount of data, it's still through the lens of intent signals on your owned and operated site. So it's a little hard to see maybe, but essentially you see users that land on your app or site from a keyword. Nothing outside of your ecosystem. But because once we gain consent, we're seeing consumers at that device level, so we're seeing signals, intent signals that sit outside of your ecosystem, we're able to see intent from users wherever they land beyond just the search results page. So we're using this data to not only inform attraction and targeting, like I'll go through in a couple of slides, but we're also looking at this to the scope beyond traditional search. So we're able to see consumers' active usage of newer technologies like voice search. So we did an analysis of active usage of the Amazon Alexa app, and we were able to see that this time last year, April, Amazon's Alexa app had 67% active usage, and flipped to this year, and it's gone up to over 80%. So we're looking at this as a mechanism to qualify consumers based on their intent to search, outside of just the search results page. So how we're collecting that data and observing that data, what we call Ogury Attract for Search, is a combination between human intelligence and machine learning. So essentially, we're looking at starting with keyword bulk sheets as a means to identify the lowest hanging fruit of where a brand wants to get their message and where they want to identify somebody as a hand raiser. But once we put that into our affinity engine, we're able to see, like I showed you in the previous couple of slides, that broader bubble of the mobile journey. So being able to see intent signals that sit outside of interaction with just your branded destinations. So typically you're using keywords to get somebody to click on the URL on the search engine results page. But like I had mentioned previously, we're using the same keywords, entering them into our technology to identify apps and sites outside of that lead to a more qualified intent. From there, we're able to make a precise attraction matrix, what we call, to kind of identify and look at performance across each one of those app and site destinations that lead them to the content that you want to get in front of them. We call that intent match. So our whole thing is that we want to make sure that you guys have the opportunity to look at intent signals outside of just the search results page in a GDPR compliant and consumer first way. Leveraging first party data to drive intent is truly the strongest way to drive performance on mobile. So to wrap it up, this pretty much paints a picture of the entirety of how our technology is working in a very nice visual way. Our marketing team would be pleased. But essentially, to wrap it up, we want to make sure that we're looking at real-time, user-consented intent signals as a means to drive the most qualification and not just rely on the myopic vantage point of one brand's ecosystem, but looking at everything else outside of that to kind of abut and make sure that we have the strongest level of intent. Put that into our engine, being able to understand how that changes and is nuanced on the course of a journey, and then be able to deploy attraction matrices in order to get in front of the right consumer, and again, understand how that changes over time. So we have a couple of my colleagues here, if you guys want to raise your hand, if anybody has any kind of questions about how you could leverage Ogury for search and use intent match to reach a more qualified intended consumer, please don't hesitate to reach out. I know that was a fast one, so if you do have any questions, let us know. And thanks for the time. Enjoy lunch.